So all of us are here today because we know that cities are the front line for a lot of humanity's biggest challenges. Cities are where abstract things like environmental sustainability are connecting to light switches. They're where behavior matters. And this is where we need innovation. This is where we should be thinking about how technology can help us do things better. It's also true that the planet is urbanizing. The human population is over half in cities right now, and cities are creating a disproportionate share of the world's economic activity. So these are all statistics you've heard if you're here. I gather that you've heard these kind of overall trends, but the zeitgeist right now is proclaiming that cities are the biggest opportunity and the biggest market on planet Earth. So it's no surprise that there's more and more technology for cities. There's more and more entrepreneurship for cities. Last year, venture capital poured $44 billion into specifically city technologies. So money is flooding in here. So if you ask, what are those city technologies? This is just a snapshot of some of those that have been funded recently. And in my mind, city technologies are the physical products or the digital infrastructures or the place-based services that are using technology in urban space and in the public right-of-way. So these are all familiar names, and you've probably used a lot of these products and services. So all of this is nothing new, right? And I see a problem here, which is that not everyone is benefiting from city technology. A recent study showed that over 20% of the increase in economic segregation since 1990 is a direct result of technological innovation. It's true that more innovative cities have greater inequality. This is a photo from downtown Boston. It's right near City Hall. And Boston is often pointed to as one of the most innovative cities in the United States. So what I see is that a lot of these companies are clashing with city governments. They have this ethos of disruption. And as they're rushing to solve a very specific problem, they're creating a whole host of externalities. They're grabbing a very small and lucrative market, but they're creating some really big problems. They're seeing more and more lawsuits, actually, and they're seeing more and more alienated customers. So it's increasingly clear that business as usual doesn't work for cities. And government as usual doesn't know how to deal with technology. And I see these two fundamentally incompatible logics. On the one hand, you have this ethos of disruption, aiming for the highest margins, the most users, the biggest impact, moving fast, even if that means leaving some people behind. And on the other hand, you have this ethos of regulation. This is thinking about under-resourced populations. It's thinking about the outliers and those people who are not in the center of the bell curve. It's about moving through bureaucracy, even if that means moving slowly. One is a logic of tools, and the other is a logic of deliberation. So I'm going to show some examples of how this tension is playing out in Boston. The first is Amazon free same-day delivery. This was an extraordinary achievement of data-driven logistics and retail. It rolled out in many cities across the United States, and it was really an incredible service. But it was also not uniformly available. This is a map of which neighborhoods in Boston had access to that service, or if you see right in the middle of the map, which specific neighborhood did not have access to that service. And interestingly, Roxbury is one of the lowest income neighborhoods in Boston. So there's a hole right in the middle of the map. And this quickly sparked a battle. There was an expose in Bloomberg Business Review, and Amazon defended their decision. They said, no, this is just the data, right? This is a calculation of the member density of Prime. This is a calculation of the proximity to warehouse facilities. In other words, this was really good business logic to leave out Roxbury. But how could that be the right decision here? I mean, this kind of neighborhood arguably needs better access to quick and inexpensive delivery, because those are the kinds of neighborhoods that chain stores are systematically avoiding, right? And so that was the kind of government logic that the mayor used to put pressure on Amazon. And finally, Amazon relented. They said, okay, we'll ship to Roxbury. And soon after, the mayors of New York and Chicago demanded that they also get ubiquitous access in their cities. So how should city tech be deployed? Right? This is a really interesting question. Who should benefit from this? And will there always be this battle between cities and governments? Another more recent example is Bird. These are dockless scooters. You may have heard of these. These birds landed in Cambridge over the summer. Right now, dockless mobility solutions are a really hot market in tech and entrepreneurship. You see dockless bikes, you see these electric scooters. It's a super hot market, and it's getting a lot of VC funding. Bird knew that, and so they took an aggressive launch strategy in Cambridge. They thought, we've got to move fast, we've got to capture users. This is a winner-take-all situation. And so this is a screenshot. Almost overnight, Bird dumped its scooters on Cambridge streets. My colleagues and I in City Hall were following this whole deployment on the app to see where these scooters were going to go. And interestingly, Bird didn't want to engage with the city of Boston. They thought, we'll go into Cambridge, where there's MIT, there's these kind of nerds and techies. We're going to capture that market, and then we're going to take on a stronger city government like Boston. As you can imagine, it was illegal to dump those scooters on the sidewalk because sidewalks are in the public right-of-way, right? Safety matters and accessibility matters. And so within weeks, the Cambridge city government tried to shut them down. So once again, this is where it gets fun. We were following on the app, where are the scooters going to go now that Cambridge is trying to shut them down? And we found them. They're all right here in the Department of Public Works. They're just sitting there and losing battery. So this is a legal battle, right? And it hasn't been resolved. There's no good solution here. It's also a design battle. I come from a design background, and for me, I kind of think, who are these things made for, right? And look at it. That thing is made for me. It's made for someone who's fit and who's young and who's able and who can pay for it, right? So on the one hand, is this a fast and sustainable mobility solution? On the other hand, is this an eyesore? Is it unsafe? Is it made for a prototypical and wealthy user? The final example I'll show is spatial data itself. This is Google Maps. You've all used it, I'm sure. It's a really useful tool to navigate unknown environments. It's also a really useful tool for small businesses to quite literally get on the map. It's much more effective to reach customers than hanging a sign outside. And I use this all the time. But I started noticing that when you open up a map, it only shows you a few particular places, depending on how you zoom. And so I took a screenshot of the neighborhood around MIT, because I wanted to know, what does Google think is important to me, right? So here you can see MIT Museum, because I'm kind of a nerd. Life Alive is a place where you can get kind of like vegan bowls. And of course, Cambridge Brewing Company and the Middle East nightclub, because I'm a young male, and that's all I can think about is beer and parties. So this is funny, and it's interesting because these are all places I've been, actually. And so Google launched a new feature on top of Maps, because they thought, we're going to help people find places they haven't been. It's about exploration. So this is called For You, and the idea is to link your online behavior, all of the profile that you've built, your economic activity and your patterns of searching, with your offline behavior, which is your suggestions of where to go and how to get there. And Google's incentive, really logically, is to give you the kinds of recommendations you're likely to enjoy. But the result is that the hottest destinations are only going to get hotter. And that, to me, doesn't really look like an economic development strategy, especially for the smaller businesses at the margins. Not to mention that the same kinds of people are getting the same kinds of recommendation. So the city is becoming almost like an echo chamber. And people are separated along these advertising profile lines. So all in all, these are examples of the business logic, business as usual, applied to the complexity of cities. These city solutions are being shipped out almost like they're consumer technology. And they're designed for prototypical users. They're designed to be scalable. They're designed with global intent. They're designed to be efficient and lucrative. And governments don't know what to do. They genuinely don't. They don't know, are we supposed to embrace these? Are we supposed to regulate? Can we even regulate? And we also don't know if we can solve this all on our own. And in between is us. we are users. And it seems like we don't have agency on either side. It seems like cities and technology are just both happening to us. And I believe from all these examples that how we design and deploy this technology matters, and that it's only going to matter more and more and more in the long run, because these cities are getting ripped apart. I showed those inequality statistics earlier on. We live in a time of extreme inequality, and we can't wait for these slow transformations in government or in business. And we can't struggle to reconcile those logics. They're fundamentally incompatible. So what I want to argue is that cities need a new logic. We need a new way of thinking about what entrepreneurship means. We need a new way of thinking about technology. So I think we've been really looking in a narrow way at all these questions. I think we've been really lazy with city technology. I think we've seen dozens of food delivery startups in the past year. There's nothing less innovative than a food delivery startup in 2018. I mean, it's crazy. So the answer isn't to do more innovative tech and do it better and find these new holes in the marketplace. The answer is to find a new way of doing technology altogether. We need to innovate with cities and with residents. We need to experiment. We need to do this in a joyful way that brings everyone to the table. So there are some ventures that believe this can happen. They're working to flip the narrative of entrepreneurship. They're designing collaboratively, and they're prototyping, and they're deploying for equity. And they know that when it comes to cities, social impact isn't a matter of altruism. It isn't a matter of corporate social responsibility. It's a matter of long-term success for those ventures and for the cities that play host to them. So it's with this idea that we started a new program at MIT called DesignX. And this is a program that deals with creating this new narrative of entrepreneurship and of design for cities. So we invite teams to pitch and develop their technology through prototyping. This is open to students and faculty and researchers. And we offer them funding. We offer them a network of mentors. We offer them an academic curriculum that they actually get credit for, so they can do their thesis as a venture. And we're helping people use design not only to develop technologies and ideas, but actually to design the venture itself. And so far, these students and these technologies that are going through the program, they're proving the hypothesis. They're proving that this kind of civic form of entrepreneurship is possible. And I'm going to show you a couple of them. So this is a company called Biobot. It began as a collaboration between a microbiologist and an urban planner. Strange pairing there. But they thought, what if we created a smart sewer sensor? And so they started working with the city of Cambridge. And at first they thought, we're going to create a whole panel of public health data. This robot goes down, it samples sewer water, and it can actually process the sewer water on site. But very quickly, in collaboration with the city, they realized the much more urgent case to be focused on is the opioid crisis, which in the United States is the leading cause of injury death. So with high quality and real-time data that, crucially, the cities own in partnership with public health institutions, they can target sensitive and effective support. So they can combat stigma, and they can get in neighborhoods that need it the most. An interesting point here is that they're creating a new class of data. Right now, there is no data for sewer. There's no legal class for data from sewer water, because it simply hasn't existed before. There's laws about who owns the data from garbage, for example, who can go through your garbage. There's no class of data on sewers, and Biobot is developing that in partnership with legal professionals and with mayors and with residents. Another company is called Nesterly. These guys are helping people age in place while also fighting the rising cost of housing. So especially in Boston, but everywhere, the over 60 population is growing, and oftentimes empty nesters have an empty bedroom, and they need help around the house. So Nesterly is creating an intergenerational home sharing platform that uses chores to cover part of the rent and offers a new way for students to live nearby where they're going to school. The technology itself here is nothing new. There's platforms like Airbnb and Angie's List and Zillow, but the way they've done it is new. So they've worked, worked in partnership with the Boston Housing Innovation Lab, and they're really solving a problem that's integral to the city of Boston. They did an initial pilot of 8 households this past fall, And that was so successful that they're now rolling out all across Boston. Finally, a company called Spaces is filling vacant storefronts with temporary artist studios. The idea here being that the trend is that downtown retail is hollowing out with all the integration of online shopping. And at the same time, artists are getting forced out of studios because they're getting converted to trendy lofts or office spaces. So Spaces is counteracting both of those trends and working directly with landlords and with artists. The result is that they're bringing vitality to streetscapes. This is an event they did, I'm forgetting the name of the organization, but it was a kind of maker fair in their space. And I think there's two interesting points here, which is that Spaces was working closely with the mayor's office and with the fire department to create a new zoning class or a new permission structure, a certificate of occupancy so that you can actually be making in formerly retail spaces. This sounds really boring and bureaucratic, but I think it's a really interesting idea, and it's going to open the door for a lot of pop-up ventures in the future. The second interesting point here is where they chose to locate. So they weren't downtown, they weren't in the innovation district, they weren't near MIT and the tech clusters. They're actually in Roslindale, which is in the south part of Boston, and it's a part of Boston I had never been to before they opened this space. So in summary, all these companies, all these ventures are working with residents and city governments, and they're co-creating technology, and they're diffusing the value that that technology creates. They're also generating new policy and new regulation in a collaborative way. So I want to bet on these technologies because they're designed with the fabric of community. So they're not going to see those lawsuits, and they're not going to see those issues arise that happen when you helicopter in technology. I also quickly want to show a project I'm working on with the mayor's office, and it's really the other side of the coin here. And the core idea was that we learned from all these companies. We know that civic innovation depends on public prototyping. We know that you have to get out of the lab and you have to get out of the university in order for this stuff to matter. But at the same time, you don't want just anyone pulling up manhole covers and shoving their robots in the sewers, right? So we need a program that supports safe and legal and productive experiments with city technology. So this is a new initiative. It's in partnership with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics in Boston, and it's called Betablox. So the idea is that we're doing these experiments with technology at the block scale. There's three pieces. The first is that neighborhoods start in a fun sort of block party atmosphere, and they write a community mission statement. They're deciding on the challenges that are important to them. They're deciding on how they see their neighborhood being better in the future. And they're writing a sort of contract for what technology can and cannot do in their neighborhood. We're also keeping a catalog of technologies. And by the way, this is both high and low tech. This is the drones, and this is also park benches. And we're working with local universities to take those mission statements and generate new technology through a design studio, through programs like DesignX. And it's all based on an overall criteria, a city-wide criteria for city technology, but also a neighborhood-level criteria for what they want those technologies and use patterns to look like. So if an idea matches with a particular technology, we can do an experiment. And I also want to mention experiment is a really politically loaded word, and I'm happy to get into that. But this is somewhere between a prototype and a real-life Kickstarter video and a block party, right? It happens in public space and with residents. But we're also collecting data. We're collecting quantitative data on the performance of things and on the patterns of use around them. For example, where people leave a scooter on the sidewalk, how many scooters gets used at what time of day. But also qualitative feedback, how residents feel about that stuff, what their ideas are for how it could be better. So this provides valuable information to the technologists who can iterate and make a better version of what they do. And it provides valuable information to city governments that can generate new forms of policy from those patterns of use. And it keeps residents at the center of this entire process. And it gives them the tools to design and have their fingerprint on technology. So Betablox becomes an interface with civic futures. And the starting point is the everyday life of residents. We're not doing focus groups. We're not bringing people out of their daily life. We're getting in there, and we're creating a tool that anyone can use, that anyone can find value in. We're actually partnering with the branch libraries in Boston to do this. So they're going to play host to some of those design workshops and the space of experimentation. So this is really a resource for people who don't ordinarily see themselves as part of the conversation in future cities and technology. So over time, everyone starts becoming more fluent with this. Everyone has their fingerprint on it. And once again, I think that that will create a more robust form of city technology. It's a new way of doing entrepreneurship. So in conclusion, I think that we're at a historic turning point. We're at this moment when technology is becoming the infrastructure of our daily lives. And we have an opportunity, and it's a fast shrinking window, to decide what we want that infrastructure to look like, how it will work, who it will be available to. And I think we need a revolution in how we innovate for cities. We need a revolution in how we do entrepreneurship. We need to redefine the art of city building. I want to riff on that. We need to think in political, economic, and cultural dimensions about that phrase. We need to think about the art of recapturing the design of technology. We need to think about the art of place-based economic modes. We need to think about the art of experimentation in local governance, the art of active citizenship in the digital era. And that last point is really important to me, that we need to cultivate our own civic intelligence and our own civic imagination. Because if we believe that the future is in cities, and if we believe that we have any hope of innovating to solve some of these big challenges, then we can and we must be more than passive consumers of technologies and cities. Thank you.